Hello, I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth at Emory University. This presentation is all about Atlanta transitioning or repositioning itself from being a regional hub to a global hub. Atlanta has grown out of nowhere. It is one of the largest growing big cities in America. Many Fortune 500 companies are relocating here. It is the third largest headquarters for large corporations, surpass Chicago, for example. And things are happening in the Southeast and in Atlanta in particular, especially after the Olympics and after the airport was built. It is the busiest airport in the world, again out of nowhere. So the question is, how can Atlanta aspire to be a global hub? Should it aspire to be a global hub? And if so, what is the recipe? Here are some observations. Based upon my work at other cities like Singapore, which is a state and also a country, Atlanta has all the ingredients but no recipe to become a global hub. What Atlanta needs is a vision and an execution plan similar to what Singapore has done, Las Vegas has done, Hong Kong does it, Orlando is doing it, London has done and repositioning several times. And in terms of countries, we see that at Iceland, from being totally non-habitable, encouraging tourism to going some other place. New Zealand is going through a third transition from strictly agricultural with lamb and wool as the economy to becoming the tourism, but now they would like to aspire and become the movie capital of the world, for example. More movies should be made in New Zealand, and they're doing everything from a proactive policy viewpoint. So, since Atlanta has all the ingredients but no recipe, what is a recipe? To me, recipe is a vision. That's it. What's a vision? Vision is inspirational. It inspires people. Vision is futuristic always, not what is the legacy or the past, where many of the additional policy research will be different than what I'm recommending. It's proactive. It is not just reactive but proactive, leading the change rather than reacting to opportunistically things that are happening. And it has a passion and a purpose, which means it begins to rally behind that vision, all of the different diverse viewpoints, etc., toward a common goal. Typical visioning aspect that we do in management, for example. In many ways, Atlanta can think global and act local. It has always thought local and acted local, local meaning regional, but I think now Atlanta can think global and act local. As I mentioned, Atlanta has all the ingredients but no recipe, so let's talk about those ingredients. The first major ingredient is historical, strategic location. It is a historical junction, it was called terminus, for two railroads to meet. So from Savannah, it can go down to, let's say, New Orleans. And it expanded accordingly. The name was changed. What happened during the railway days happened to the interstate highway days. And what happened to the interstate highway days is happening with the airwaves now, being the hub for a very large traffic, air travel primarily. I think Atlanta is also now going from airways to information highways. It is a major digital hub. And I will talk about that a little later on because somebody some time ago at Bell South, Richard Snelling was the name, as a chief technology officer, put more fiber optics in the ground in this city than we had imagined. There's a lot of dark fiber also. These are highways ready to be tapped in the information age. In my analysis, I find Atlanta is the ideal city to become the headquarters for all multinationals for their whole Western Hemisphere business. You don't need two headquarters, one for North America and one for South America. That's historical. So you don't need some headquarters in New York, New Jersey, or in Toronto, another one in Miami or Panama country. Atlanta fits perfectly well in the middle. You reduce your corporate overheads, for example. And this is an architecture that's emerging, especially among European multinationals as they begin to focus on the Western Hemisphere. And among the Asian multinationals, they find Atlanta may be a more strategic location to manage both Western Hemispheres, North America and South America. Atlanta has the talent. This is not the talent of yesterday, but the talent of tomorrow, which I call digital talent. It has 5 major universities and dozens of colleges. It has vocational technical programs, quite affordable in many ways. In addition to generating talent locally within the state of Georgia or neighboring states, it also is attracting talent from outside the state. Talent from neighboring states, as I mentioned, or far away like Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, New Jersey, or all the way from other countries. It's a city being discovered by others. Isn't that interesting? So it's a city where people will come to study. Let's say students come from all over the world, but they like the city. They want to live in the city, put their roots here in the city. Fascinating. It's a very affordable living for a large city. One of the few affordable cities left, actually, because land is plenty. It can grow in all 4 directions because it is not on the ocean, for example, like Los Angeles or San Francisco, where you cannot go into the ocean. It can grow in all 4 directions, huge land mass, and the land is still very affordable. It's a city in a forest, as people call it, which it is literally. When I came to Atlanta in 1991, that was my immediate reaction. There are oak trees in everybody's everybody's backyard. It's a great place to have recreational facilities. From stone mountains to the lakes, for example, to anything you want practically. So it's a great, very affordable living. And many families, therefore, don't like to relocate from Atlanta once they come, and they would prefer that the breadwinner flies out to work while the family stays here. Fourth, and a very important ingredient, it is number 1 in terms of business friendliness, easy to do business policy by the government. Not only tax incentives, but easy to do business. And of course, like many southern states, it is right to work state. These are all the advantages it has, ingredients for becoming a successful global hub. I also found very fascinating that Atlanta also has a unity in diversity. Surprisingly, it has become a lot more inclusive than ever before. Ethnic diversity is here, not just between the African Americans and the white population, but all cultures are here. There's a global consulate general diversity, consulate as we call it, diversity. There are 75 consulates here, plus many others who are honorary consulates. It has a civil rights heritage, which actually unifies in many ways than not unifies. There's a faith diversity. Practically all religions of the world are actually practicing in Atlanta, both Christian faith and non-Christian faiths. And it seems like it's a city with a passion. Very fascinating. It's fascinating that the city basically says we are too busy to be intolerant. Again, There's something there that people, when they come here, feel good about the city. They cannot articulate. It's more friendly than California. Many people have told me that. Sixth resource advantage or ingredient is that it has both digital and physical infrastructure. The busiest airport in the world and still more expansion possibilities. Underground fiber optics that I mentioned before, very large scale, so I can have big pipeline information base. It has already become global payment hub. I'm told that 70% of all payments go through Atlanta as a hub. So how can one reposition Atlanta? My view is that just like in Singapore, which wanted to become a manufacturing hub, and my analysis showed that instead, rather than becoming a manufacturing country, it became a distribution country or a city, and it worked very well. 4 flows, flow of products. So they ramped up the Singapore seaport, like Savannah here. Flow of people, so they ramped up the Changi airport for north-south traffic. We can do the same thing. Flow of money, they could not have a stock market, so they decided to bet on private equity like a Swiss banking. Flow of information made the city very intelligent. Everything is basically digitized. Parking lots are digitized. Taxis are digitized. You put the smartness into all of the mechanical, electromechanical, physical infrastructures. If Singapore can do it, which when I visited in '68 looked to me just like a Fiji island. And when I went back in '80s, it was a brand new city. Dubai has gone through the same thing. I mean, there are many cities that have arisen out of nowhere, and they did not even have the right ingredients, and despite that, there was a vision, a passion to do something. So my view is that it's very simple repositioning. It needs to move from being a regional hub, for which it was always identified from the railroad days, to becoming a global hub. And also from a low-wage economy, manufacturing lower-waged activities such as chicken plants, for example, or agriculture-based. You can still have the agriculture, but make it high-wage. So how can the city go from a low-wage economy to a high-wage economy is the journey, and from regional to global is what I will talk about. In my analysis, I found that there are at least 7 areas where Atlanta can create a global identity for themselves. The first one, like a surprise to everybody, is the movies and entertainment industry. This is out of nowhere. I'm told that in 2017, Atlanta surpassed Hollywood. Think about that. It was not even in the radar screen of anybody that Atlanta can become the largest movie and television producer in the nation. People who do research have told me that the economic impact of movie industry or movie and entertainment industry was $9.5 billion in 2016 or 17. Now, think about the movie industry on a global basis. So one has to figure out which are the other movie global capitals. Who makes the largest number of movies? Surprisingly, other global hubs are the following, which now becomes very interesting because you want to align with those cities and have some sort of a global footprint. Seoul, Korea, large movie maker. India is always the largest movie producer in the world. 1,500 or 1,600 movies a year they produce. Has about 1 billion people watching those movies just within the country and outside. It's called Bollywood, following Hollywood. How can we make Bollywood and Hollywood meet in Atlanta? It's very possible. So one would target Seoul, Korea. One would target Mumbai or Bollywood. And there is another big city, Hyderabad, which is called Tollywood. One would target, in this particular case, something like a Toronto. London is a very key city because it's a very good movie producer. Wellington in New Zealand. I was surprised when I found through research that Nigeria is the fourth largest movie producer in the world, and Abuja is the place. So there's a connection. In movie industry, therefore, one would link about 4 or 5 cities in the world to become part of that global hub. And it seems like, again, like everything else, Atlanta is being discovered by outsiders, not by us. So you do have a Pinewood Atlanta studio, which is a part of a global studio architecture by Pinewood from England. They have more than 1 million square feet of movie production stages and facilities, 74 stages, 5 countries. They are obviously in New Zealand. They are, of course, in London or in UK. They are here. That creates a nexus. It has nothing to do with Hollywood. So how can one attract the producers and directors? And of course, from those foreign countries or cities. And very interestingly, the largest movie consumer in the world now is China. And by 2025 latest, China will be one of the largest movie producers in the world, not for the Chinese population, but for all populations. So how can one think about either Beijing or Shanghai, wherever they make the movies, as a part of the alignment? Suddenly now you are creating a global cluster of movie makers. That means talent moves accordingly. That means directors and producers are constantly in Atlanta, as they are in other movie capitals of the world. So to me, that's one very key factor. And we seem to have the talent, we seem to have the infrastructure to do end-to-end movie production, not just on location, but post-production, for example. We can do pre-production. Everything is possible. So I'm very strongly advocating that movie industry should be one focal area for Atlanta in terms of its global identity, not just local identity. The second one is equally surprising. And I was thinking about it for about 6-7 years. Atlanta is destined to replace Detroit. It'll be the Detroit of the 21st century for the automotive sector. Now people say, you must be kidding. Partly it's true. It will not be the American automakers who shift their capacity, although it is happening. Just like the old days of textile engineering, textile machinery, textiles moved to where the cotton was, automotive industry is shifting to the south primarily. And therefore, if Pittsburgh can become the steel capital, Akron, Ohio can become the rubber tire capital, Detroit can become the automotive capital, Atlanta now can aspire to become the automotive capital. But thinking from a future viewpoint, not a low-wage earning automobile manufacturing, but the automobile of the future. What's the automobile of the future? It's all software and chips. Largest component in assembling today in automobile is no longer steel. It is basically software and chips. The Tesla of the world is the future, and it will not be just Tesla, it will be every car maker going electric, online capabilities, etc. They're basically moving cellular telephone base stations. I've done research on this actually. That I can make by putting server and a switch in the trunk of the car, can be even embedded in the dashboard, and make the car as my mobile base station, so I don't have to build towers. Eventually, I can even network themselves properly, so I don't really need a typical telephone company. You can see all of that evolution potential in the wireless world, digital wireless, digital broadband. That's where the future is. And again, like in the case of movie industry, Who are the market makers for Atlanta as an automotive capital of the 21st century? They are the German car makers. All 4 or 5 major German car makers are now hubbing in the south. Mercedes-Benz relocates its even regional headquarters, the North American headquarters, to Atlanta from New York, New Jersey. Porsche has its headquarters right here. But so is BMW nearby. So is Volkswagen nearby. And my view is that we need to therefore look at automotive capitals of the world, where else automobile industry is identified. Stuttgart in Germany, for example. Chennai in India. India is the second largest small car maker in the world now. And India is the largest component maker in the world. So one leverages that whole supply chain, because automobile industry, when it hubs, has to have its suppliers come and locate near where the assembly is. So you do have the digital architecture on the one hand as an advantage because of the digital talent, software and hardware, but you also have the traditional physical architecture in place about assembling the car. So I'm very much absolutely convinced, and I have not seen anything that says this forecast will not work out or this vision will not work out. And therefore one has to look at the automobile manufacturers in the world, not just Detroit, just like the movie industry. Largest automobile market now is China, not America. Largest luxury car market is China, not America. Chinese manufacturers will come in Atlanta because all of the resources and the hubbing of assembly is taking place, which means the suppliers can come in. Japan is a very big automobile maker. While under the Reagan administration they came to Ohio, Kentucky, etc., now they can come to the southeast and Atlanta becomes the hubbing place. It doesn't mean all the factories are in Atlanta, because many factories are not in Detroit. They are in nearby Michigan State, they are in nearby Indiana, nearby Illinois, wherever they are. Is the theoretical conceptual capital where the headquarters are there. So one can make Western Hemisphere headquarters located here but targeted by industry. I'm quite sure Atlanta will be identified 15-20 years from now as the automotive capital of America. Third area is what I call innovation for health sciences. Healthcare is fastest growing industry in America, has already crossed $3 trillion. There is no one single city that has taken a position that we will be the innovation capital for health sciences. Again, back to that ingredients but no recipe. I find fascinating. We have all the ingredients here. I was surprised myself when I learned that there are 3,000 clinical trials done in Atlanta or in Georgia in general, but mostly in Atlanta. We have large device makers who are based in Atlanta, like Siemens, Philips, C.R. Bard. We have world-class research institutions like Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, Emory University, which is primarily a medical school, Georgia, or health sciences, I would say, Georgia Tech, which does enormous amount of innovation in this area. So one can capture all that and promote the idea that we can aspire to become the innovative or innovation capital for health sciences. Health sciences includes combining pharmaceuticals on the one hand, device making, medical devices on the second hand, and healthcare delivery. And healthcare delivery seems to have the largest potential in terms of looking into the future. Not only because of the new digitization of healthcare industry, which again is the competency Atlanta has, but actually it is an industry where innovation will be necessary. It is an innovation not by passion, but of sheer necessity, because healthcare costs cannot be sustained as they are right now. Fourth, and by the way, because of that, one has to say which are the other healthcare capitals in the world? Be thinking always about the world. And there are many capitals in the world which are healthcare. Singapore comes out pretty loud and clear as one of them, for example. And they are targeting China as a market for them. So I would think about Singapore as a possibility. I may think about San Diego on the other hand within the country. Mexico has some presence. One has to map out wherever the healthcare, Geneva, of course, with WHO. I can go on giving listing of the names, but my view is that again, thinking about linking those global healthcare centers where research is done for the future. Agriculture is the backbone of the state of Georgia. While Atlanta is a metro area, but you have the whole state mostly in forestry. We have paper mills here because of the kaolin, which is the whitening stuff. Trees are here pretty much. How can we make agriculture smart? From low wage to high wage agriculture. And of course, two major areas for agriculture and its future are using technology, are water conservation, very important issue, and alternate energy such as solar energy, wind energy, and one can even put nuclear energy, but I'm not putting nuclear there, but solar and wind are very key. So it's not agriculture, but smart agriculture. In my research many years ago in the field of agribusiness, I found fascinating that in the state of California, they grow rice. And actually, they cut the rice after harvesting the stems by actually laser. They plant the seeds for rice by aircraft. This is in the 80s when I was doing research. Think how far the industry has moved. Today you have the drones who can do a lot of this work. Smart agriculture, higher wage in many ways. Those are the key ingredients we need to think about. Number 5, and very predictable, is that we are identified as the tech services capital. You have the fintech growing enormously because of the global payment system having here, the fiber optics that I talked about. But this is a major hub for IT services. Not just to do work for IT services in the state of Georgia or in the city of Atlanta, but people live here and they do work all over the country or all over the world. Now again, which are the IT capitals of the world? Well, IT, especially from the BPO viewpoint, India has emerged as a major IT services provider on a worldwide basis. So one would think about Bangalore, which is the IT capital in India. For example, one would think about Hyderabad, which is another major IT services and a BPO. And one can plot out similar capitals of where the work is done, like the BPO in Philippines, for example. Manila is the key point. One can articulate those cities which have primarily focused and differentiated themselves on professional IT services. And I find it is beyond just IT services, but legal and financial services. We can be arbitration capital, just like Singapore is becoming arbitration capital out of nowhere. It just requires that you put the positioning out there, promote it accordingly, give incentives, invite the talent, etc. etc. It's a very simple recipe. 6th area for me is global R&D. R&D is done. One can hub it here. That goes for pharmaceutical R&D, very big opportunity worldwide. And of course, China is leading the way in pharmaceutical R&D. Japan has always led the way. So one can identify where pharmaceutical R&D is done, not manufacturing. Of course, software is a big R&D area. And one can think about, therefore, having somebody like Alibaba, Tencent, which are very large e-commerce with huge software needs hubbing over here. Not for the market here, but for global talent here. And of course, Japanese multinationals, again, is very key to invite from the R&D viewpoint, not from a manufacturing viewpoint. The last area, again, is non-intuitive. And this came from my work at Singapore, where we found that there is no way one can have a stock exchange to compete against Hong Kong or, let's say, Tokyo Stock Exchange. So instead, one looked at Swiss private banking as a role model, and that led to Temasek as a very major private equity company, allowed private equity guys to come and hub into Singapore as opposed to Hong Kong, for example. And Singapore's success in this area can be modeled relatively easy. Private equity does not have to be the same place as public equity, which is the stock market. We see the evolution of blockchain, a new technology that is coming, and therefore all of the cryptocurrencies are coming. A lot of that will be private equity again. Private equity will be very similar to the Swiss model. And therefore one has to go after large private equity capital in the world, and that turns out to be Saudi Arabia, SoftBank out of Japan, Temasek out of Singapore, as I mentioned, and there are many other places where private equity can actually literally be hubbed over here. Private equity will be the future of capital markets, more so than treasury bonds on the one end, or surprisingly, let's say the stock markets. I see the future more in private equity because the world will consolidate a lot more. There will be need to transition. Sovereign guys will invest through private equity as the investment comes bigger and bigger into America, let's say from China, from Japan, from the rest of the world, because the new policy that we are creating at a national level. So private equity is the bridge in between quite a lot. And they're becoming quite large scale when you think about the size of Blackstone today, for example, not just KKR and the other private things. Berkshire Hathaway, to me, is more like a private equity people. There's a huge opportunity to create a hub like we have done with the movie industry. All of this is a great idea. How do we execute? I think execution is very key, not just vision. And here are the typical elements of execution. First of all, you need to unify everybody behind that vision for implementation, which means how do we increase awareness, especially among the Atlantans themselves, that we can aspire to become global hub, not just a regional hub. Very important. So one has to use social media. One has to use any publicity mechanisms. One has to showcase successes here, like in the movie industry. Showcase how German car makers are all hubbing here. It's a matter of just information, education, and influence. Second element, very important, is to link cities around focal areas. Sometimes the same city may come out in more than one area. London may be both for private equity market as well as entertainment. Seoul, Korea may be for automobile as well as for, let's say, digital technologies. Seoul can be for movies. In fact, surprisingly, in my matrix that I did between 7 focal areas and the cities, Seoul, Korea comes out much higher than I even imagined before my research. So I would look at Seoul, Korea. I would look at London. I would look at Mumbai. I'm giving usually cities we have never thought about as opposed to the traditional cities in our mind. Third, rather than giving incentives across the board, same amount of capital that one gives as incentives, tax incentives, property tax, income tax, whatever we do as a policy, can we make it incentives more focused to primarily attract more and more from all over the world key players in those industries, whether those are health sciences, basic research R&D, automobile, entertainment, or IT services. And those are the examples that I would basically, or agriculture, as I mentioned. I'm very passionate about agriculture personally. I think we usually don't think of agriculture when you live in a metro area, but agriculture is a very key industry on the verge of becoming very modern with the newer technologies. So tax incentives for each of the focal areas as opposed to all-purpose tax incentives that we offer generally. Think global, act local. This is the mindset aspect. Olympics all over, as I call it. Who would have imagined that Atlanta would bid for Olympics and will get it? It happened. I think it's possible because one thinks global. Olympics is a global event. You are competing and comparing with global cities. And somehow we had the leadership, we had the vision, we had an execution team to get it done. If it can be done for Olympics, it can be done for anything, is my view. Civil rights legacy is a global. Atlanta is well known for the whole Martin Luther King movement here. It is the birthplace of civil rights. And civil rights are becoming so important in all cultures today. So one can link civil rights legacy with Mahatma Gandhi's legacy in India, Mandela legacy in South Africa, and many other cities where civil rights have become very key transformer of the society. 5, very simple, encourage foreign multinationals in those 6-7 areas that I talked about to establish new headquarters or move their headquarters for all of Western Hemisphere. Which makes sense, it's a win-win. You don't need 2 headquarters, they're very expensive, and this is a very affordable place where if one wants to build a large campus, easily one can get 70-100 acres within the metro area. So to me, it's again where we have the land availability or affordable living advantage, the location advantage, everything comes together. So it's a question of now motivating in those 7 areas how foreign multinationals can hub it here in Atlanta. We still need to invest in infrastructure, but infrastructure for global flows, not for domestic flows. Flow of capital, flow of money, flow of people, flow of goods, whatever we do. So one has to think global flows of those 5-6 areas, flow of culture, which is very likely to happen, flow of research and science. I can give you examples of what was done in Singapore, and one can basically see and emulate how we can do it in Atlanta. And the last one, I think we have a very large consulate, number of consul generals or consulates here. And consulates can become very good ambassadors, not only for their countries, but discovering Atlanta. As I meet many consul generals, once they are relocated here or they come here as a part of the diplomatic mobility, they like Atlanta. Come with very skeptical view. Many of them even think that Atlanta is more like Atlantic City. I mean, I've found that common problem as I travel in the world. I say, I'm from Atlanta, and they say, oh, yeah, it's a great gambling place. I say, no, that's Atlantic City near New Jersey. Interesting. So there's a lot of awareness increase, not just within the Atlanta city and the state of Georgia, but actually in foreign countries. What Atlanta is all about. And one can leverage the consulates around here for a two-way bridge building. They are great ambassadors for their countries, but they can equally become great ambassadors for Atlanta. So let me conclude this presentation. My view is that Atlanta is destined to become a global hub. Now, even if we don't do anything, it's going to happen, as it has happened. It will be discovered by others, which is a very important point I'm making, both from within the US and from foreign countries. Surprisingly, others always discover the potential of a city, not the natives. They think it's great, it's fine, but others find excitement here. Very vibrant city. People like to come here. So my view is that I think it will be discovered by others more so than by us. It's very important to increase local awareness and aspiration about how Atlanta can become a global hub city. And as I mentioned, leveraging the consular core is very key to the success in the process. Thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation.